Hey guys, me and Buster Green here, and we have another monumentous episode of the best episode ever. Yesterday guys, I finally saw the last Gintama movie. Gintama the Final, and that means after being stuck for 18 years in anime hell, I have finally finished Gintama. Now the new movie was alright, it wraps up a lot of the story's loose ends, and now that it's over, I think I need to cover this epically long anime that a lot of people might have not gotten into because of its very limited American availability and its hard to tackle subject matter. And today, we have to talk about Gintama. I first became aware of Gintama when a couple of people online made fun of the fact that they did a really epic episode lampooning Neon Genesis Evangelion, which was all the rage at the time back in the 90s. Now, the actual episode isn't that great, so I actually started watching Gintama around 2005. After getting a more proper introduction to it through the Shonen Jump Smash Bros. Ripoff game, Jump Superstars. And from there on out, it's been a very painful 20 years, usually every fall binging through season after season of Gintama as they've come out, mostly as they've aired, and putting up with the fact that they vary wildly in quality from year to year. Before I continue on with this explanation though, I should probably explain to you what Gintama is, for anyone who doesn't know about it. And I also have to explain what the big deal is about Gintama. To explain Gintama to you as simply as possible, Gintama is a parody of Rurouni Kenshin. Do you guys know Rurouni Kenshin? Hit 90s historical samurai anime, one of the only anime to ever get a live action remake that was technically at least as good as the anime. So Rurouni Kenshin is the story of a samurai called Hitokiri Batosai, or sometimes called Batosai the Manslayer, who killed so many people during Japan's unification wars that when the now peaceful era of the Meiji came about, he did not know what to do with himself. So he reinvented himself as a lovable goofball. But despite that, his history of violence and the murders he committed would come back to haunt him, and he would be manipulated by his old foes while trying to make an honest living as a freelancer, until ultimately recognizing the need for his skills, the Meiji government would force him to get back into a series of samurai battles and other setups. Gintama rips off all of that, and then throws a huge monkey wrench into it. See, in real-world history, the tumultuous Meiji era, the era that Kenshin is set in, is triggered off by American Commodore Perry sailing his American steamships into Tokyo Harbor, firing off his iron cannons, and then generously telling the Japanese government that they were 300 years behind the rest of the world, and they had to modernize or die. In Gintama, however, it's not Perry who destabilizes and modernizes Japan, but a series of alien invaders called the Amanto, which I think means sky people. Anyway, the Amanto colonized Japan with their state-of-the-art alien technology, and they modernized the samurai of the 1880s to have technology and culture on par with modern day, if not sometimes better. And so, for comedy's sake, even though Gintama is set in the historical 1880s, a few years after the American Civil War, the aliens have given pretty much all the samurai Nintendo GameCubes, Shonen Jump, Gunpla, teriyaki chicken, instant noodles, pretty much whatever the hell they need to be relatable to modern Japanese teenagers. And from here on out, we are in Gintama, a story about a former samurai named Gintoki Sakata, who has reinvented himself as a lovable goofball and is suddenly faced with the misery of modern Japanese life. Crap like paying rent, annoying neighbors, social media. He buys himself a Vespa and opens up the Odd Jobs Gin agency, a freelance, whatever needs being done agency, mostly the kind of shit that you might ask for on Craigslist, and he lives there with his two disciples. The two children he adopted, the red-headed alien girl Kagura, who is part of a running gag, everyone thinks she's Chinese, and a local otaku nerd named Shinpachi, who has part of a running gag, everyone thinks Shinpachi is a pair of talking glasses, and the man wearing them doesn't matter because he's a fucking nerd, so fuck him. Anyway, the three of them together do random odd jobs for the lazy people of Tokyo, and do their best to try and pay their rent. They also have an adorable giant puppy named Sadaharu, who is not actually useful at all. Gintama severely warps the premise of Kenshin. Although they both tell the story of disgraced and depressed samurai with bloody pasts, failing to adapt to the peaceful Meiji era, meeting friends along the way as they reinvent themselves as lovable goofballs, what was beautiful and painful in the historical drama of Kenshin, in Gintama everything is cranked up to 11, and then you add in aliens, homosexuals, and pop culture references, and suddenly you have a comedy masterpiece on your hands. Gintama is a very weird anime because it toes the line between being either an amazing comedy parody of Kenshin or a not that good sci-fi ripoff of Kenshin. I guess considering it had an almost 400 episode run, being a parody anime of a 100 episode anime, it does a lot of weird satirical things. It takes some blows at the Japanese government, and for all those extremely Japanese jokes, it was never quite the #1 candidate to get a proper English translation. I guess a big reason that Gintama never quite worked in the US is you have to really know Kenshin, or at least know that the Meiji era happened for a lot of the jokes to work. It's kind of like how MacGruber is an extra level of ununderstandable and completely insane if you don't know that's a parody of MacGyver, or at least you know what MacGyver is. You know, MacGyver. Anyway, despite that, there have been a few half-hearted attempts to bring Gintama to the US, including an out-of-nowhere dub of only Season 4. Why Season 4? That's not a good season. It's like the middle of the show. That's the middle of nowhere for the show's story. Like, the attempts to bring it to the US have been incredibly inconsistent and have sometimes randomly ended up focusing on the boring and serious story arcs, which is another one of the show's main problems. Now, I feel like when Gintama started 20 years ago, or maybe at least for the first 5 years, they had managed to perfectly balance out their comedy and their action stories extremely well. But as the show stretched on, it got really weird and unbalanced, to the point where later on in the series, they would just do an entire season's worth of gag comedy episodes, which were all usually very outstanding, and follow up that season with an entire series worth of moving the plot along main story episodes, which were action-packed, but those episodes had zero jokes and they were completely boring. They didn't do anything unique, and otherwise it just turned into suddenly this basic samurais and space anime. Considering the show is either one of the best comedy anime of the past century, or a very below average anime about Meiji samurai fighting in space, I really have to favor the comedy episodes. All the comedy episodes have these really great vibes, and they waffle between feeling either incredibly down to earth and relatable, or kind of funny with the sci-fi stuff that's kind of out there. Like, another very easy way I can sum Gintama up to you is it's Futurama with samurais. Now, I don't think Gintama is a perfect anime. I can't even recommend you watch all 367 episodes like I did. If you do, though, you're going to have a lot of great times. You're going to have some good moments. There are a lot of awesome anime parodies and some fun jokes throughout the years. And now that the show is finally over after all these years, I can at least tell you that there is a straightforward start to finish point for it. But the show's biggest weakness, though, is just that when everything turns absolute sideways and they go into those serious story arcs, the show just suddenly takes itself way too seriously, and Gintama just does not work as a serious show, especially since the show really nails its continuity. So when you get to the serious episodes, you have to put up with like 18 episodes of a completely serious guy who just looks like RoboCop because they introduced him in a gag episode where they was doing a one-time parody of RoboCop. Like, there's a lot of things I do not like about Gintama. Like, I really hated this one time where the show, like literally for whatever reason, they've done the Benny Zakura story arc at least 3 times. They did it as a couple of episodes, then they did it as a recap movie. Then ridiculously, the recap movie ended up being the basis for the live action movie. And in my mind, the Benny Zakura storyline sucks. It's easy to get the concept of the show from the Benny Zakura storyline because it's a bunch of samurais fighting over this evil bioorganic katana on a spaceship. And yeah, sure, it's one of the show's big action set pieces, but it's so boring compared to the later story arcs, and it just pales in quality to any of the funny episodes. Like, seriously, the serious story arcs in Gintama are just pure pain. If I want to watch a 60 episode story arc about how important the Shinsengumi were to the Meiji government, I'd rather just get a straight and historically accurate version of that from Kenshin, rather than sit through the boring Gintama version, which includes weird scenes where they're all binge drinking mayonnaise, while at the same time going through all the same beat for beat historical political bullshit that was in the Kenshin version. But then at the end, they also fight a random space alien cheetah man because it's Gintama and they gotta do that. Like, I get that a lot of people like Gintama for the fact that they use the characters in the comedy episodes and then stick with still using them in the serious ones. But for me, it just makes a really weird, off-putting tone. It would be like if in the next season of The Simpsons, they just did a straight serious drama season where they manhunt Sideshow Bob for 12 episodes straight, and they don't tell a single joke because he's killed someone, and they have to keep reining in that he's a murderer and he could kill again at any moment. Because of that, Gintama, by and large, has been the only anime I've ever experienced where the filler episodes are consistently better than the main story. Any filler episode is just more entertaining than any of the boring sci-fi story arcs. Because the random filler episodes are just pure, unexpected insanity. Always surprising, always gonna put a smile on my face. And those are the heart of the show. They remind me why I love the show. Gintama has had a really wild run over the past 20 years. They parodied at least every popular anime at once, and they've done a few super meta episodes where they've made fun of various real-life people who were assholes in real life and totally deserved it. Like, there was one really particular meta episode from a few years back where Gintoki reacted to the show's President Donald Trump parody because, yes, even in Gintama, somehow Trump was elected president of feudal 1800s Japan, and he said that they should drain the swamp to make things better. So Gintoki and the Oddjobs reacted to that by buying a sump pump and literally draining the swamp to see if what Trump was saying was true or not. They also did a whole story arc where all the characters except Ginpachi had their gender swapped. Ginpachi avoided it because his glasses had their gender swapped, by the way. And then there was also the time the show turned me on to Japanese pop star Kayla Kimura because Gintoki would not stop making fun of the fact that she had become famous for writing a one-hit wonder song called Ring-a-Ding-Dong about a cell phone. And come on, Ring-a-Ding-Dong? That's so easy. Like, what I love about the show is that the jokes about whose ding-dong she rang are just strong enough to defy any language barrier and show you the universal power of comedy. I also love that in the last episode of the Gintama anime, they actually have this weird Judge Judy style trial where they try the manga author and explain how he screwed the anime up. And then Gintoki just goes on this long fourth wall breaking rant explaining how most long running animes end up fucking up the story that the manga was trying to tell by stalling for time. And you gotta watch the Gintama movies because each of the Gintama movies just have these amazing fucking gags. Like, one of them starts off with Gintoki beating the shit out of the anti-piracy logo. And the final Gintama movie has this amazing 8-minute long sketch, kind of a roast, about how the anime ran for 20 years and was never once more popular than Dragon Ball Z, which, now that I've had a few days to sit on that movie, might have been the best part of it for me, because that's the only part I remember now. Gintama is an anime comedy masterpiece, and I have to just be honest, the serious episodes of Gintama suck. They're boring. So for that reason, the best episode of Gintama has to be the funniest episode of Gintama. So in a rare move, I have narrowed down the 18-year-long, 367 episode, plus a few movie run of Gintama to 2 absolute best episodes. Now I'm going to start with the runner-up. The runner-up in my mind is the darkest comedy episode of Gintama. I think if you guys like dark comedy, well, this is quite frankly the darkest episode of Gintama ever in terms of the comedy. Like, if you guys like the show, It's Always Funny in Philadelphia with their unique brand of humor about how shitty people are and insane punchlines involving death, cannibalism, and suicide, I think this is the only episode that ever went that low and matched that level of depravity. And that is episode 297. Keep your farewell short. Episode 297 starts with a flashback that in the previous episode, Gintoki and Shinpachi nearly ended up killing Kagura, who is a Yaito alien. She has extremely pale skin and has an almost vampire-like sensitivity to sunlight, so she always walked around with an umbrella to block sunlight from hitting her. But on the hottest day of the year, Gintoki and Glasses stole it from her, and now she's been hospitalized. She has contracted sun poisoning, and she won't stop puking. She ends up turning blue, and she won't stop puking, but despite that, Kagura is pretty sure she can recover from this, because there's a big twist here. Kagura is not actually sick. She is faking it to get back at Gintoki and Shinpachi for being assholes to her who stole her precious umbrella. However, the situation intensifies when Kagura, who's in the hospital, is visited by Sogo, the psychopath Shinsengumi guy. He shows up and reveals that he's ready to pull the plug on her because he hates her. On top of that, he's brought the Princess of Japan with him, who is friends with Kagura, and then Sogo says that Kagura won't die until they have a final showdown. But then the princess says that because Kagura is still breathing, Kagura needs to make funeral plans with her, and the Princess of Japan will pay to give Kagura a full funeral. And so Sogo proceeds to strongly imply that Kagura is about to die, despite the fact that Kagura is struggling to talk to the princess. Because the subtext here is that the Princess of Japan wants to attend Kagura's funeral. So because she wants to do that, now Kagura has to die. So Sogo sees that she's still trying to talk, so Sogo knees her in the throat so she passes out. She awakens the next day inside her coffin in the funeral parlor as Gintoki and Shinpachi prepare to bury her. The princess has apparently paid to give her a very nice funeral, and Kagura slowly wakes up in the middle of her own funeral, slowly putting together what's going on and figuring out that she's being buried as a hero with full state honors. So Sogo notices that she's trying to talk and knees her in the throat again, so she tries to get out of the coffin desperately before Sogo reveals that her coffin is actually a tanning bed to give her additional sun poisoning and turns on the solar lamps to try and cook her to death before she can tell anyone she's still alive. Sogo knows she's not dead and is trying his hardest to finish her off so the princess can peacefully enjoy her funeral. Sogo also goes over to her coffin during the ceremony, confirming she's still alive and laughing at her hysterically because to him this is hysterical. He increases the heat in her coffin and says she has about 12 hours to live, and if anyone else at the funeral actually gives a shit about her, maybe someone will rescue her before she dies. But then to intensify the situation, they put her coffin on a conveyor belt so that no one can get a straight or prolonged look at her, and apparently when she reaches the end of the conveyor belt, she's going to be cremated. There's also a gag where someone tries to put a rose on her dead body, but they end up stabbing it in her eyes, and then in her nose, and then finally Kagura uses all her will to sit up as they try to adjust the rose for a third time. Then Sachan, the nerdy sexy ninja, shows up and notices that Kagura is sitting up, and since this is apparently wrong, Sachan drops a fucking boulder on her. The Shinsengumi also notice this and they think that the boulder is too small, so they get together and get a much larger boulder to drop on her. The entire time, paralyzed Kagura is screaming inside her head at literally everyone fucking up her funeral and bastardizing her body, and it's hilarious. This really builds the tension in a very typical Gintama fashion, and this is how the humor in Gintama usually works. There's also a gag where the conveyor belt taking her to the cremation oven just keeps on going and going, to the point where the conveyor belt is at one point suddenly stretching out over literally miles over the city of Edo. Then somehow someone in the crowd decides that crushing Kagura's dead body with the giant boulder is going to be the best way to remember her. So everyone rallies around the giant boulder, and then they start singing a song about how great the boulder is as they get ready to drop it on Kagura's supposedly dead body. Now, at the last moment, Gintoki steps in and slices the boulder in half with Kagura's umbrella, saving Kagura from being crushed, and also takes her body off the conveyor belt to stop her from being burned to death. Gintoki decides that since she was such a good friend, he has to return her umbrella because he thinks it would be sad if she didn't have it with her when she goes to heaven because it was her most treasured object. And finally, Kagura, touched by this, regains the ability to talk and apologizes to them for faking her death. But then this pisses the shit out of Gintoki and Shinpachi, who instantly go into pure rage and punch her to death over the fact that she's actually alive and they've allowed such an expensive funeral to take place, and everyone's going to blame her if they find out she was faking it. At this point, people start debating if Kagura might have faking sick, and so Gintoki, Shinpachi also start faking that they're sick to try and get the funeral canceled, and everyone realizes that it's a massive scam, and they get furious at them. So in the end, all three of them are put back on the conveyor belt to be cremated, and they all go straight into the furnace, and they all die. The end. This is how Toy Story 3 should have ended too. Ha 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 ha! Well, don't worry, they'll be alive again next week. Well. Now, that is the darkest, funniest episode of Gintama. That episode gets so many points in my book. By and large, no other episodes of Gintama ever went that dark, but a lot of them are still funny even without going that dark. It's just, that episode is hilarious because it's about her fake funeral, the way they torture her through the entire episode, and the fact that they all die at the end. Pure comedy masterpiece right there. But despite that, that is not my final pick for the funniest episode of Gintama. Because there was one episode of Gintama that stuck out in my mind more and resonated with me the most. Because in my mind, there was just one funniest episode of Gintama. And as it turns out, this funniest episode of Gintama is actually inspired by true events. The episode that resonated with me the most has always been my pick for best episode. And that was an earlier episode, episode 98. Play video games for 1 hour a day. This is, in my opinion, the definitive episode of Gintama. If you ever want to know if you're going to like Gintama, you should just watch this episode. This is the episode I recommend you guys start with because it gives you a real taste of what the show is. So episode 98 starts off with a fourth wall-breaking Gin Sensei side gag series where Gintoki is a teacher addressing the real-life audience and lets on some behind-the-scenes knowledge that this episode is based on true events, and Gintoki, the character, is also based on a supposedly real samurai. The episode then also takes a pot shot at One Piece, who at this point have been running for over 1,000 episodes now. God, One Piece is a long anime. Anyway, so let's get into the episode. This episode starts off with a nightly news update focusing on Akihabara, real-world Akihabara, which again is just modern-day Akihabara, but in Gintama it exists in the 1800s. And yes, it takes place on a very cold night in November. So on this night in November, the Bentendo Oi is about to come out, and hundreds of otaku are standing in line trying to buy it. Because at this point, we get a recreation of what I assume was a real news broadcast that actually played on real Japanese news, going over various different people trying to buy the Nintendo Wii on, again, a painful night in November. Now, they interview a bunch of different people staying in line that they plan on playing it. They want to play the new Mario. They want to play the new Zelda, Twilight Princess. Was it Twilight Princess? Yeah, it was Twilight Princess. And yes, some of them are shitbag scalpers. And then we finally pan over to Gintoki, Shinpachi, and Kagura, who are waiting in line and have started a campfire because yes, November 19th, 2006 was a fucking Sub-Zero night. The odd jobs have apparently been hired to stand in line for some rich asshole and buy him a Nintendo Wii. So they start making some cheese bread from the anime Hiding in the Alps, which I've never seen, but everyone gets pissed that they would have the audacity to make the strange food from the Hiding anime, while all these otaku who have been waiting in line for days to buy the Wii are starving. Kagura says they should share the Heidi food, but Gintoki says they can't, because the cheese is made from the goats that they raised themselves, and the only way that they could give it away to justify the hard work of raising up those goats on their farm would be if they traded places with someone in line in exchange for the food. So they end up trading 20 pieces of the Heidi cheesy bread to move up 20 places in line. Gintoki is pissed that they accepted this job as line standers, and that all these adults would be so hardcore about buying a kid's toy, which is a video game console. And that the fact that this many people care about video game consoles is a sign of the world's collapse. Elsewhere in line, we see Katsura and Elizabeth in another spot in line cooking hot pot over a kotatsu. Gintoki gets pissed at them eating hot pot and kicks them in the face, so then they move up another 10 places in line, and Katsura is pissed at them since he's been apparently waiting there for 2 days. Gintoki is pissed at Katsura since Katsura is trying to overthrow the Meiji government and shouldn't be buying video games. Now, Katsura doesn't really get what the Wii is, but he just wants it because it's a new Nintendo and he wants to play the new Mario game. And Gintoki is like, fuck you, Katsura. If you want a Nintendo, just buy the old Nintendo. The Shinsengumi are also waiting in line to keep themselves warm. They brought a bathtub and are taking turns taking baths in it. The bathtub is also being heated by a campfire. Eventually they start fighting over it, pour out all the water, and freeze to death because they're naked. Gintoki deploys another Kotatsu and lets the Shinsengumi rally under it. The Shinsengumi let Gintoki know that the story is only getting 100 Wiis, so a lot of these people are fucking screwed. Finally, at midnight, the store opens to sell all the Wiis. An instant Black Friday grudge batch battling begins. Gintoki gets a Wii, but gets kicked out of his hands by the Shinsengumi. A full grudge match riot starts over the Wii. It bounces through the air several times. More people charge into the store trying to get the Wii, and further wrestling matches break out. The news reports that a mob has started rioting over the Wii, and that the Wii should be pulled from sales. They interview a Nintendo representative who says that it's to be expected that the people would riot because they made them wait so long to buy the Wii. So to make the people stop rioting, the manager of the store decides that they will simply have a game tournament for the right to buy the Wii. A demo console of the Wii comes out, and the insane manager who resembles the G Gundam announcer shows up and forces all the rioting customers to participate in this contest. He also says that if they win, they will get a Wii for free, and that anyone who successfully bets on the winner of the contest will be allowed to buy the Wii. And then everyone gets super pissed and starts throwing garbage at the manager because fuck that. They've been waiting in line for 2 days and no one wants to do some stupid contest after waiting in the cold for 2 fucking days. So then all the characters do this weird, very Japanese impression of some pro gamer from the 80s. And then one guy doesn't understand it, so he does an impression of that guy who once tried to kick Muhammad Ali to death because the joke is confusing. And then the video game battle begins. So the manager decides that they are going to play a parody of the game Tokimeki Memorial, and the first person to do a sex speedrun will win. In other words, the first person to successfully play through the game and have sex inside of Tokimeki Memorial will win. Can you have sex in Tokimeki Memorial? I've never actually played it. It was one of those games that came out too long ago in the 90s and never got a good English translation. Anyway, so then all the characters go off on their own rants about how much they like or how good they are about dating games, while also the other characters make fun of the fact that they probably suck at dating for real. Katsura returns at this point from under the Kotatsu dressed as Mario and declares that none of them know what true love is. So Shinpachi gets offended at him, punches him in the face, and also Katsura is apparently still clueless about what the Wii is and thinks that everyone is there to buy a twin Famicom. A twin Famicom is a legendary piece of video game cryptozoology. It's basically a black Famicom combined with a Famicom disk system, and it is rare as shit. Toshiro gets confused by Katsura, thinking he's the real Mario, and tries to get Mario's autograph or at least a photo with him. Also, Sogo identifies Elizabeth as Green Mario, and everyone shits on him for not knowing that Green Mario is Luigi, and then an argument breaks out about who gives a shit about Mario when it's 2006 and Shenmue 3 still hasn't been released. And then finally, we get the full G Gundam reference as the announcer does the Gundam Fight Ready Go thing. And the storyline isn't resolved in this episode because the video game sex speedrun tournament is going to happen in the next episode. But this episode still ends on my favorite ending theme of all of Gintama's 20-year run, Speed of Flow by Rodeo Carburetor. And so yeah, that in my opinion, best episode of Gintama. Now, I'm sorry guys, I just love video game jokes too much, so that's why I picked that one. But in my opinion, this episode is also the best because it's a fucking time capsule. It's a time capsule to a particularly terrible day in November 19th, 2006. A day felt around the world that many people experienced, and my experience on that day was very similar to Gintoki's, because this is the one episode where Gintoki said something that I just related to too much. See, on November 19th, 2006, I was in New York City. I wasn't in Tokyo, but that was still the release of the Nintendo Wii. And it was one of the coldest and most brutal nights I ever lived through. I think I went out around 5 p.m. just after sunset, and I suffered through upwards of 6 hours, freezing in the fucking cold, waiting to get my hands on that fucking Wii. And as I waited in line for that fucking Wii, there was this fat kid who showed up at my Wii launch and he tried to cut in line. And this fat kid looked exactly like Cartman from South Park. And yeah, this fucking fat kid, he was cutting in line, he was swindling people. I think he tried to sell candy at one point. So my real world experience was incredibly similar to this episode. On top of that, when the Target eventually opened at midnight, everyone rushed the Wii section, and yeah, there was a mini stupid riot, just like this episode, that the manager of the store had to clean up and resolve. I think the Wii launch was my first ever insane midnight console launch ever. Maybe it was the first one I ever participated in because of my age, but historically speaking, it was one of the craziest because it was the first one I'd ever been through before, and I think it was the first time there was ever that demand for a video game console before. But hey, as a fun souvenir, I got this Target Wii gift card that used to light up blue when it was brand new. Anyway, apart from that, episode 98, filled to the brim with non-stop video game, anime, and Gundam jokes. So yeah, how could I not love that one? Those are all the things I love, so that's why I picked that one. Anyway, that's just what I think. If you guys disagree with me, there are 374 other episodes of Gintama you can watch yourself and make up your own mind about. Be my guest. Anyway, I'm you, Buster Green, and I once froze my ass off on a Sub-Zero November night trying to buy a Nintendo Wii, just like my boy Gintoki. So please subscribe. I'm 270 subscribers away from being monetized, and if that happens, I'll be paid for making these dumb videos. So that would mean a lot to me. Thank you, guys. Alright, I'll be back next time with another crazy video like this. Stay warm. It's cold out there.